Hi, my name is Laura Brandenburg from Bridging the Gap, and today we're going to talk all about the requirements, the elicitation techniques that are used by business analysts. And I'm going to give you my top 5 requirements elicitation techniques, as well as a free checklist that you can download to help you get started right away. So when we think of requirements elicitation, most business analysts tend to think of big, full day workshops that are super complex. These are big events. But the reality is, in most cases, requirements elicitation happens in much smaller sessions and also require techniques that don't even involve stakeholder interaction at all. But those smaller sessions can involve just a few stakeholders, for example. So let's take a step back and talk about what is requirements elicitation. Simply put, requirements elicitation is the process of discovering information that allows you to put together the requirements or draft and analyze the requirements. So in particular, elicitation will often refer to engaging with stakeholders in some way to understand their needs and expectations when it comes to the scope and the detailed requirements of a project. Now, as I mentioned, there are techniques that do not explicitly involve stakeholder interaction, and I'm going to give you one of those in my top 5 as well. So let's talk about what these 5 requirements elicitation techniques are. So number 1 is observation. This is when you're sitting with a user or even via screen share in a virtual environment, and you watch them do their work, or you have them demonstrate doing their work in a hypothetical way. Like, this is what I would do if I was processing a new account or processing an order or completing a refund. And there's a distinction here in user experience circles. So there's some types of preference towards what would be considered pure observation, where the stakeholder doesn't say a thing and they would not say in their normal course of doing work, and you as the business analyst don't ask any questions or for any clarifications. That is to achieve a different objective around really understanding the stakeholder's full environment. As a business analyst, we will often ask questions. We'll have the stakeholder articulate what they're thinking, why they're doing what they're doing, share the business logic, and we will ask different questions to really clarify that logic as well as alternative scenarios. So if it looked like, this one worked, what if we had clicked something else here? Or what if you didn't receive that document? So you start to ask questions so that you're getting not just that stream of work for that particular instance, but for a broad range of instances. The second requirements elicitation technique that I want to share with you is to do a diagram review or a walkthrough. This could also be called prototyping. This is a great way to elicit unexpected information and to use the structure of a requirements model, like a workflow diagram or a use case or a wireframe or an entity relationship diagram, and to use that structure to help collectively fill in the model, which often leads to unexpected information surfacing. You could start with a draft model. So if it's an entity relationship diagram, you could have a few key concepts drawn on a whiteboard. You could print it out on a sheet of paper or put it up on a shared screen if you're doing a screen share. And if you're doing a wireframe, you could have kind of a skeleton with some navigation and some pieces in place, or you could just really start with a blank page. It really depends on your stakeholder group and how adept they are at using that particular model. You could also start with a fairly finished draft of that model and walk through it piece by piece to get input and feedback from your stakeholder. All of these are different ways to do walkthroughs using a prototyping technique with different stakeholder groups. Now, the third technique I want to share with you today is called a structured interview. This is by far the most common technique that business analysts use. It's usually either one-on-one or with a small group of stakeholders in a meeting. It could be an in-person meeting or it could be a virtual meeting. You want to be prepared for that kind of meeting with an agenda, and you want a meeting agenda and you want a requirements checklist. You want to know what questions you are going to ask going into that meeting. So you might share that with your stakeholders ahead of time if you think that they would benefit from doing some preparation. But some stakeholders are much better if you're just asking those questions on the fly and don't overwhelm them ahead of time with all the questions that you might have to ask. So it's really a judgment call. You can download a sample requirements checklist absolutely for free using the link below. And I really invite you to check that out as a way to start thinking through what questions you would ask in a requirements interview. Of course, that checklist is for a specific type of requirement. It's transferable to multiple different domains, but it is for a specific area or type of requirements. So you want to be clear on what objective you specifically are trying to accomplish in that meeting and what questions you need to ask in order to discover the information to achieve that objective. So I promised you one technique that did not involve any stakeholder interaction, and that is our next technique. It's called documentation review. This is a requirements elicitation technique where you can discover a lot of information by analyzing any existing documentation to understand potential requirements. This can save a lot of stakeholder time. If your stakeholder time and your access to stakeholders is really at a premium, you definitely want to prioritize what documentation you can review ahead of time so that you can be really prepared. It can help to come up with those questions for your structured interview or draft a diagram that you can use or make observation more clear as well or more pointed and specific. A big caveat with this technique as a business analyst is that you don't want to over-invest in document reviews or make assumptions. You don't want to use documentation that could be dated, might not reflect your actual stakeholder perspective to just, decide what the requirements are. Often you need to come back to the stakeholders and validate the information that you've used or use it to develop. And as I mentioned, the requirements checklist, that discovery checklist will allow you to have a very productive, structured interview to ask those questions. Now, the fifth and final technique that is sort of a blend of stakeholder interaction and not is to do a survey or a questionnaire. This is a great way to get information from a lot of people or from people with whom you don't have a direct connection. A survey is also a great way to receive more objective information in a low intensity way because often people will write things into a survey that they might not share personally. On the flip side, sometimes the information is unclear and difficult to interpret without more context. We use surveys here at Bridging the Gap to gather feedback from potential customers and also to get feedback from our course participants after they complete our program. So most BAs will use a combination of elicitation techniques. You really want to be adept at multiple different techniques so that you can pick and choose what technique is going to work in your specific situation. And again, if you want to get a quick way to get started, I really invite you to download our free requirements checklist. That link is below. It's for a specific domain or area of requirements called supporting a customer. And then it'll help you get started right away in just thinking through what questions to ask. Even if that's not the area you're working on, just seeing the kinds of questions that are available and reinterpreting them for your specific situation is really going to help you get a head start in figuring out what questions you need to be asking your stakeholders. And this is often where business analysts get stuck in the first place. I'd love to hear in the comments below what requirements elicitation techniques you use as a business analyst, where you want to improve, and how you are finding that checklist is supporting you in your business analyst career. Until next time, I'm Laura Brandenburg with Bridging the Gap. We build our profession one business analyst at a time, and success starts with you. Thanks for being here.